I'm Ezra Klein from the New York Times, and I'm pleased to be here today with Gautam Subbarao of Workiva and Jennifer Kosar of PwC. And I was hoping you might both just say a couple of seconds here on your roles and how they've interacted with AI over the past year. And Gautam, why don't we begin with you?
Sure. Thanks, Ezra. I'm Gautam Subbarao. I'm the VP of Product Management for AI and Machine Learning at Workiva. I actually studied genetic algorithms and application of genetic algorithms in industrial systems. And for the last decade or so, I've been focused on developing AI and data-centric products for a variety of companies, such as General Electric, Amazon, and more recently, Workiva.
And Jennifer?
I'm Jennifer Kosar. I'm a partner at PwC, and I lead our Trust and Transparency Solutions business, but I'm also responsible for the implementation of generative AI into PwC, as well as helping our clients with their implementation of AI strategies and responsible AI.
So we're talking about a year, a little bit more now than a year after ChatGPT first burst onto the scene. And the experience I've had in my personal life as a kind of fun person to parties who likes to ask people if they're continuing to use AI is that most people I know are not. Most people used it for a bit. They like playing around with ChatGPT now and again. Maybe they use an image generator to make funny meme images or images for their kids, but not that much has been sticky for anybody but the coders in my life. My sense is that's not been true in business. So, Gotham, tell me from what you're seeing, what have been the most important use cases, the things that businesses seem to be using this for day after day after day in a way that's really working?
Firstly, I want to acknowledge the fact that coding is actually the number one use case that we do see in businesses as well. Over 50 to 60% productivity gains in software development, software testing, documentation of code. But I wouldn't stop there. I would say there are some fundamental shifts in technology that have happened over the course of the last year. The first one is the ability to bring your own data to large language models. And this is really important, I think, for businesses because unlike a consumer use case, the vast majority of business data is not actually in the public domain. That is actually getting solved in a very significant way over the last year, I would say, since the advent of ChatGPT. The second big change, I would say, is actually in the user interface. These are only useful to businesses as long as somebody can do something with generative AI or even the co-pilots or the advent of co-pilots. But what I think is the dominant trend here that's coming out is that these generative AI assistants or co-pilots are becoming the dominant way for employees in a company to interact with their knowledge or data. And that's important because now you have the ability for somebody who doesn't have necessarily coding skills or data skills to actually interact with the knowledge repository of their company using natural language. That's a big shift. So the second use case that I see is largely around research, being able to kind of analyze and kind of go through the corpus of documents in a company. I would say the third use case that I see in business is definitely content generation. So a lot of business use cases or office work or business reporting is very heavy on content creation.
Jennifer, I'm curious if you're seeing anything different, if there's anything you would add, or you would say, no, Gotham's absolutely wrong. Nobody's using it for one of those three cases.
Sure. Well, he's not wrong. I think what I would add, and sort of backed up by a recent survey we actually did. So more than half of the companies we surveyed invested in AI in the past year. And interestingly, more than half are planning even more significant investments for the coming year. I think the reason that it may still feel like it's not front and center is that what we observe is that it's still mostly in the back office. So definitely coding, right, is not something that would be inherently transparent to the average customer or user of the technologies or the products that a company puts forward. But even beyond coding, where we're really seeing it, and somewhat surprisingly, and most prevalent so far is in things like finance, HR, marketing and comms, even risk functions, like things like compliance, the cyber functions, right? This is really where the power of generative AI and even traditional AI systems to analyze large amounts of data, increase productivity, even just get past that first draft problem for a lot of functions and organizations has been really powerful already. So organizations are absolutely moving past wait and see. They're even absolutely moving past the limited use case stage and really starting to get to some interesting ideas and use cases already.
You talked, Jennifer, about the first draft problem. The first draft problem is like the central problem of my life. I'm a writer and I keep having to write first drafts. I can tell you that it is vastly easier to move from a first draft to a second draft or a third draft than from no draft to a first draft. But the thinking, the creativity, the processing that happens between draft 0 and 1 is also vastly more important than anything that happens between 1 and 2 or 2 and 3 and 3 and 4. When we talk about generative AI, the word generative assumes it is generating off of something, correct? But it also means that a period of time in which the worker, in which the user might be doing that generation themselves, is getting skipped. That we're moving in away from being writers to being editors. Is anything lost there? Is there a kind of fake productivity increase that's possible as people begin to use AI to generate things, which makes it all go faster? But I mean, we all know that the big jumps come with an insight, with a deeper kind of understanding, and not doing some of that foundational work can rob us of that. How do you see that being balanced out?
So I think what you're saying gets to a very important point in what we think about as responsible AI, what we think about ultimately trusting in outcomes of AI. And it's about understanding its capabilities, which do evolve, it feels like, by the week at this point.
Hmm.
And yes, even its limitations. And I do think there are tremendous opportunities and powers in this technology, but there are limitations, as you talk about, and how the risks associated with its use balances with those opportunities. And so you have to incorporate that evaluation with this, what you're talking about in human and machine interaction, what humans are good at, what the machine is good at, and how that creates fundamentally different opportunities and risks as they work together. So what we talk about with businesses as they think about how to do that is not to stop at simple yes, no decisions around should I or shouldn't I, is a human best or is a machine best, but really how together it becomes a fundamentally different evaluation about who is best at each part and how now breaking down all those pieces and parts might look very different than it did before. I mean, we're talking about fundamentally different capabilities than we had, and the sum of the parts may be greater than it was before.
And Gotham, I want to go back to something you said a
Yeah.
minute ago, which is you had a really fascinating use case too, which to me is very related to this, wherein companies can upload what is proprietary data, what is internal data, and create a kind of corpus that an employee can interact with, right? Somebody can ask questions of, you can query it, you can ask it to summarize it. I mean, I've done a lot of playing around myself because a lot of my work relies on knowing what is in a PDF or in a book, of trying to upload, I guess, PDFs, because it usually can't absorb a book length of text, a PDF into some of these systems and querying it and finding that what I get is useful at one level, but what I miss is profound at another level. So I'm curious how you think about that, both the question of what is gained in being able to query these databases and what is lost if that becomes a user interface into how people begin to interact with a company's body of knowledge.
So you can actually get generative AI systems to do the right thing for you, provided you build the right use cases around this. So my big concern with generative AI is not so much about can generative AI kind of get to a reasonably accurate answer, but is it actually being used for the right use cases? I think the cost and time and effort involved in finding data often leads many individuals in an organization to not even look at the data. So that results in making decisions that are not data anchored, that results in not having broader participation from your kind of own workforce. And that really hinders, I think, innovation, creativity when there's only a handful of people trying to interact or make sense of a certain corpus of data. So that's the good side of it. The drawback, of course, is if you're using this to produce content at a faster pace and you do not have any oversight on what is being produced, all you're doing is accelerating the creation of wrong content.
So when you're working with companies or thinking about the places where it seems most likely generative AI will be able to make huge productivity improvements and be trustworthy enough to use at scale, how do you think about that transition? How are people thinking about what happens to those workers? How are people thinking about, is this a place where people get laid off, retrained? Is there sort of new functions to be sort of working alongside these computers, like, or these models rather? What does like the responsible transition look like?
We firmly believe that part of responsible use is actually upskilling, bringing people along in the journey for a couple of reasons. So, first, as we talked about, the intersection of use between the systems and the machines are critical to not only the opportunity, but also to the success and the outcomes and to their understanding of its limitations. And so, If you bring them along, right, you get to better practices, better responsible use, better outcomes, but you're also likely to capitalize on the opportunities a lot faster. No one's going to understand better where the opportunities might be to transform your operations, to get to those gains, to get to better customer experience, to get to new innovations faster than the people on the ground in your organization. We've actually found in again, studies we've done that more than half of most employees and organizations are very optimistic about the power of these technologies and what it can do for their roles, and not as negative as you may think about the job displacement that it's going to create. Maybe that's naive, but at least in the short run, they see it as a more powerful thing than a negative. So bringing them along, upskilling them, right, not only prepares them for the responsibility they're going to have, but helps them see the opportunities it creates for them in the future.
When you talk about upskilling or the new opportunities, what kinds of things are you talking about? If you're thinking where the new jobs are going to be, or you're a college student thinking about what kinds of things you get trained in, what do you see as like those spaces of growth, not just shrinkage for human beings, not just for AI models?
If Gen AI democratizes access to data and democratizes access to technology, the winners in that may really be those that address best this issue of integration of humans and technology. And that may be this harnessing of what we all do best. And that may require really creative thinking in different ways than we've had before. I do think that comes down to data science. I do think that comes down to technology skills, but I also think it comes down to creative skills. Asking our schools, right, our learning, right, to capitalize on what fundamentally human intelligence looks like and how we reason, how we create, and harnessing that will actually create sort of, again, different players in these sectors, and different winners and losers in the companies of the future.
Gautam?
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Jennifer said. Certainly agree with all the points she made. I believe that people who are versed with AI technologies and AI skills are actually going to be taking jobs away from people who are not versed with those skills, right? I think that's the kind of superpower AI and generative AI gives in your ability to do tasks and your ability to do things. We're probably less than a year away from a graduating class that is natively fluent with using generative AI capabilities for doing work. And I'm specifically talking about even in areas such as finance and accounting, where graduates in those fields are actually using generative AI in universities, and they're going to be expecting these skill sets or these tools from their employers when they come to work. We have to manage where it's not just about upskilling existing employees, it's about, do we even have the competencies and skill sets to deal with a new crew of people that are natively fluent with these capabilities?
I think it's a great point. And I want to, there's one other thing nagging at me that you said a minute ago, though, Gautam, which was that the marginal cost of creating content is being driven to zero. But because when you drive the cost of creating content to zero, what you get is a lot more content. How do companies actually police and exert quality control over the amount of content that they will now be swimming in? How do managers manage the amount of content and reports and summaries they might now be getting from employees? I mean, we all know that as email happened, we all got a lot more to respond to. Generative AI can increase that to a functionally infinite amount. So when you think about those choke points that have to exert quality control or figure out what they really need to process and understand, how do they maintain a certain level of discernment?
Let me unpack the comment that I made earlier about the marginal cost going towards zero. Right? Maybe I'll use a simple example here. Just a few months ago, I wanted a couple of creative digital photos of my nephews. It took probably about close to $1,000 to get 5 versions of those. Right? Today, you can get way more replications of those for about a tenth of a cent. Right? That's like a million X difference in the marginal cost. As a consumer, I don't mind the different options when the cost levels are that low, because for me, it's a matter of picking the one that I like, and the cost of producing the rest is actually quite low. But that dynamic changes in the case of businesses when the impact of what you're producing has far more significant consequences than maybe I would say on a consumer level. So there are probably a number of things that I would like to suggest or maybe recommend for businesses to consider as they're enabling generative AI as part of their businesses or business process or even products, right? First thing is define the blast radius, right? Start with use cases that contain who's actually using it, what are they using it for, and who's actually got the ability to create content, right? Do not release something that the whole world can start interacting with day one on use cases that are completely out of control on what you can or cannot be doing with. The second thing I would say is have clear policies on identifying mechanisms for identifying when something goes wrong or is something going wrong. have metrics in place, have a clear accountability or a path for somebody to pull a kill switch if something does go wrong here, right? That's not something you should be discovering after the fact that something goes wrong. That's something that needs to be in place before you engage in generative AI systems. And then maybe the third thing is a big part of responsible use, in my opinion, is not to deploy generative AI for full-blown automation. I'll give you an example of what we've done within Workiva here. We actually do not use generative AI to create content without the knowledge of the user of the document. So there's nothing going on behind the scenes where generative AI is magically reading your data or creating content in your document without your knowledge, right? We actually require, I would say, require the user to actually review the content and accept the content before actually incorporating that content into any document or any report, right? So those are some ways to mitigate the problem of let's go after this mass explosion of generative AI on kind of auto-generated content that nobody cares about.
This is a tricky thing to talk about because I don't think we have a great language for it, but I'm in the attention business, and a lot of companies at some level or another are also dealing with the scarce attention of their customers or of the public, and not polluting the attentional commons with lots of stuff. Whenever you expand the pipeline of things people may need to pay attention to, you also need to figure out how to help them pay attention. And I think, as with the example of the photos, a lot of us have had the experience of perverse consequences here. Something becomes very cheap to do. We do a lot of it, and as such, what we do with it loses value to us because we are not paying attention. We're now just storing things. We don't know how to choose between them. When you talk to companies trying to do this in a responsible way, how do they think about that question of attention, of how to not use these capabilities to drown either their own internal organizations or their customers, users, and the public in just stuff? Because now you can, and the impulse to do so will be very near at hand.
I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way and think about the issue of transparency and how that contributes to trust. So we talk about responsible AI, and responsible AI is really about how you build AI. It's from the perspective of the creator and the things they've done to create the AI in the way that benefits the user in the best way possible. And part of that is transparency. That is about providing the most information they can about the practices they use, the outcomes they were trying to achieve, how that is aligned to the benefit of the stakeholder. Trust is a very different thing, and that gets more to what you're talking about, I think, about how the end user makes decisions, achieves an outcome, gets a benefit or does not, or in, of course, some of the worst scenarios is biased, is harmed. And from that user's perspective, again, whether they can trust it, that is from their perspective. And the challenge we have right now is defining what good looks like in an AI system. What does fair look like when that outcome, how is that measured? Again, walking back to that transparency, walking back to those responsible practices. And we do have other systems in the world that look at that concept of trust, again, from that user's perspective, things like our financial reporting ecosystem or legal systems in the United States. But we have not yet figured out how to apply those to something like AI because it is so universal, or generative AI, right? It is so universal. It is so new. There is a lot of work to be done to get us to something that works like that, to again decide when that attention is necessary, when that trust is necessary. It is not all use cases all the time, but get those users to ultimately know when it matters, when to pay attention, and when to consider whether some form of validation or trust is important to how they think about the fact that AI was involved.
Are there things you see people trying to use or companies trying to use AI for or asking about using AI for that you both think it's not quite there yet, right? Use it for this, but not for that. Be very careful before you go here, right? If you understood the technology a little bit better, you wouldn't try to input it, bring AI into this part of your business. Are there places like that for either of you that you think, hey, this is a zone where I'd be very cautious before adding generative capabilities, even though there are some business trends in that direction?
I love that generative AI is opening up the discussion for broader transformation. We find when we do workshops, when we talk to organizations about how they want to leverage its power and its opportunity. Yes, there is a tendency to start with how can I use Gen AI to fix this business problem, and there's a desire to use it. And we give the example a lot. We'll start with 100 ideas, and 50 of them have nothing to do with generative AI. They have to do sometimes with things as basic as just stop doing that, right? It's as simple as that. But I would say, to answer your question, some of the one thing I hear a lot that is a misunderstanding of its capability is it's not a search engine. it's not very good at that, in fact, in especially its capabilities as we stand today. And so I steer away from that as sort of its where it sits at the moment, but it's getting better.
Gautam, anything come to mind there for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think hands off the wheel use cases is something I do worry about with generative AI. You hear a lot of talk around agents. You hear talk about generative AI being able to take action on its own, because of being connected to a variety of host systems. That's an area that I worry about because we've not fully understood the ramifications of what does it mean to take action, and is it even taking the right action? What happens if the right action is not taken? I would recommend start with use cases that have human in the loop, human oversight, and limited blast radius type of use cases first. Understand what's possible, understand where misuse can occur, understand the consequences of edge cases that you might not have thought about before kind of turning it on broadly in an organization.
What are you seeing, Jennifer, in terms of the differences in how the sort of organizations want to use generative AI, right? How kind of workers think of seeing it applied, how kind of middle managers see it being applied, and how it's being understood among executives, among boards. As companies change, right, there's often differences in how different parts of the company absorb what can be done. What is sort of making boards stay up at night about this, and what do they worry about, and what opportunities do they see, and how is that different, if it's different, than what you see from sort of just folks doing the job day to day?
I think boards are first focused on fundamentally just understanding the technology, understanding its capabilities. Boards will lean on risk, as is their role to do so, and understanding the implications for the organization, including the risk of not taking action, right? Including the risk of being left behind, being disrupted if an organization does not deploy this. And so that is a lot of the questions we get from informed boards. The C-suite really, again, similarly has to position the organization for success and create that strategic vision and really make sure that decisions that are made about how the technology is going to get deployed are really aligned with an organization's overall risk appetite, but again, also goals and objectives they have around seizing opportunities. It's really about culture. It's about innovation and experimentation, that learning and upskilling. We hear a lot of that discussion in the organization. How can they set up the right infrastructure? How can they get to scale quicker? It's, a lot of the things that are pretty common with any new emerging technology. And so that's where the C-suite's mind is at. What's really important, again, to thinking about responsible AI is a really diverse set of perspectives is important in thinking about these types of technologies. So pretty quickly getting to making sure very different sets of parties are around the table. And that includes, now to your third bucket, bringing in the employees, like bringing everybody along to this conversation, creating forums for, again, innovative ideas, getting the technology in people's hands. I think the quicker people can start to play with it, use it, understand it, again, both opportunities and limitations, the quicker you get to more refined ideas about how it plays with existing processes, existing architectures, machine human interactions, because again, this is fundamentally different. It's really a new capability, right? It's not just a new technology that we've slapped alongside all the other things we've ever dealt with.
Where does this go, right? If you're the CEO of a company, or you're the CTO of a company that has never really had to think that much about AI, you're good at making what you're making, but you also don't want to be disrupted by a competitor who comes up as being AI native, right? Is, formed this year, and some form of bespoke chat GPT agents are built into everything they do. Like, how do you build that into the culture and structure of your company when you weren't structured and cultured for that in the first place?
Yeah, I think that's a real challenge for the C-suite and maybe even the board. I would say, in terms of my recommendation for CTOs and CEOs in terms of where to go with generative AI, I think I'd say there are 3 points. First is get started with generative AI. It is hard to theorize about this. It is hard to kind of pontificate on use cases or applicability within your organization if you do not understand it yourself, if you're not skilled in it yourself. To an extent that you can actually guide your organization on what to do with this. I think the second big thing that CEOs and CTOs should take into account is the build versus buy versus integrate. Have a clear rationale for, do you want to go build all of this from scratch yourself, or do you want to integrate with existing capability, or do you actually want to buy and incorporate these systems in your organization? The third thing that I mentioned previously is having a kind of a clear process for a kill switch or a safety mechanism. AI and generative AI is no longer something that a dedicated function or a dedicated group of people in an organization needs to be versed with. This is something that is becoming increasingly a core capability, like math, that everybody in an organization will be not just expected to know, but actually required to know. And that cultural change is important for a couple of reasons, right? Because the responsibilities around generative AI is not just limited to the CTO or the board. There are a number of functions within an organization and specific employees that need to do specific things for users to have a responsible experience around generative AI. And the cultural change is hard to come by if you actually do not invest the time and effort in experimenting with generative AI and learning what is possible with generative AI.
I think for all the reasons Gautam just referenced, we may see the rise of the chief AI officer. I mean, if the last year has taught us anything, is that this requires incredible focus and attention. And Ezra, as you alluded to, right, it's just the pace of it, the infusion into the culture, creating something that is separate from your day-to-day responsibilities, that importance, right, just may create that new function and that new role. And while it will create diversity of thought, bringing all those people together on a continuous basis just might create a very new role, right, to drive strategy, to oversee initiatives, ensuring responsible and ethical practices, bringing stakeholders together to ensure alignment. I could just see that kind of role becoming increasingly important in the coming years.
We talked at the beginning about how we're speaking a little bit over a year from when ChatGPT was released. We're speaking a year from now. What is being done widely that is only being done seldomly now, right? What has moved into sort of wide application? Or what is possible, right? What has become possible in terms of the capabilities of the system, in terms of the way they can be applied or linked up to other applications that isn't possible now?
I'm hopeful that in a year from now, we'll actually start seeing more proliferation of AI and generative AI into solving problems that fundamentally shift humanity. Think of clean water or clean energy. I mean, these are material things that we can go after because of freeing up resources and mind share that's possible due to productivity gains with AI.
Gautam Subbarao, Jennifer Kosar, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.